Okay, so it's setting that up.
Morning, everyone. Looks like we'll get started for the ambient meeting. I think I have the only item on the agenda. Oh no, we have Ian under future. Okay, Ian, I didn't mean to cut you off. Why are you? Do you want to go first with admin scope policy?
I think we should probably maybe push that out to next week and see if we can discuss it while Louis is here. I don't know if we want to do a quick, like, brief overview. I mean, it basically says what the issue is. Yeah, I think
sure. If you want to give everyone enough context that they can.
Oh, sure.
Follow up there.
So with ambient, you might want to have. Oh, there's like a lot of background noise. Oh, okay. So with ambient, you might want to have a like global scoped policy, and right now, if you might want that to be attached to a waypoint. Right now, if you don't specify like a target ref of some sort, in ambient, it signals intent that you want ztunnel to enforce it, but there are things that ztunnel can't enforce. So we sort of hit a little bit of a weird spot there where how to express that isn't necessarily clear. And so I think we can just get some sort of clarity documented for that, and then someone can go ahead and work on implementing once we know a good method for doing that attachment. Go ahead, Keith.
Yeah, so I think the way, when I did the original target ref doc, the way that I think that I intended this to work, that we intended this to work, was that that anything with a target ref should automatically override anything without a target ref in the admin namespace, like Istio system, for example. This question's around target refs that exist in the Istio system namespace, correct?
It's about how to attach something to a waypoint. Like without a target ref, with the layered approach that we've designed, it means that ztunnel enforces it. So how do you bind that admin policy to the waypoint layer instead? And that's where I think it's a little bit unclear to me.
Gotcha. So all waypoints should have this policy, essentially.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, gateway class probably feels the most natural there. But I definitely could think about it more. That's a good call out.
Yeah, it's right at the intersection of your work and Louis' layered work and everything. So folks can think about it. I don't think it's like mega urgent, something that we need in 122 to be backported. I mean, folks can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think we can marinate on it and come up with some solutions and discuss next week.
Okay, yeah, thanks, Ian.
This doesn't feel like a backport thing. This feels like we've identified a gap in the existing implementation and something that we should iterate on before it goes GA or whatever.
Makes sense to me.
Thanks. Go ahead, Mitch.
Okay. I think this will be a pretty boring and uneventful chat. We've had some conversation over the last year about how ztunnel would be safely upgraded. Because it's a daemon set, we don't have the same sort of controls and tools that we would expect to have over like a deployment. And in particular, we've sort of talked about hypothetically how we might cordon and drain nodes before upgrading them with the ztunnel. But of course, a daemon set doesn't actually respect that by default. You can drain all the nodes you want, but you need to be able to have control over which nodes are running a given daemon set or a given version of a daemon set in order to really say we're only upgrading the ones that have drained and the ones that are live we're currently not upgrading. So this is a very simple proposal about how we might do that. Today, for context, when you upgrade Istio Ambient, say from 122.0 to the soon-to-be released 122.1, all the daemons across all the nodes will upgrade all at once, and there will be some dropped connections. Kuat actually sort of detailed here, thanks Kuat, some of the symptoms of those dropped connections. Sounds like there will be some difficulties with sidecar compatibility. Bottom line is it's not a hitless upgrade. We would encourage a customer to take an outage or to expect some network disruption during that upgrade process. Probably not terribly long and maybe not terribly significant, but for some customers, it's not going to be acceptable. So what we want to be able to do is to control which nodes the ztunnel daemon sets run on, and particularly create a new daemon set with a new and updated version and gradually roll that out one node at a time after draining those nodes so that there's no application workloads on those nodes at the time of upgrade to be disrupted. So does everyone understand kind of, have I set the context well enough? I'm not seeing questions, so I'm going to assume that that means the context is clear. So basically, all nodes that are in use that have applications scheduled to them should have a single ztunnel instance, and it should remain in continuous operation without disruption through the upgrade. Conversely, we need all of the ztunnel instances to have been upgraded by the end of this process. And at any point in the process, we also need the ability to roll back, pretty standard requirements for upgrades. And then this requirement, I think, already exists today, but it's useful to point out that during the upgrade process, you're likely to have some nodes that have been upgraded, other nodes that have not. Traffic should flow between those two sets of nodes fluidly without any compatibility difficulties across versions. My proposal for how to deal with this is using node selectors. If you're not familiar with node selectors, you can limit what nodes a given pod can run on or daemon set can run on. Using node selectors, basically only the nodes that match this label will schedule the given daemon set. Others will not schedule it. Adding this node selector to the ztunnel daemon set will cause a restart of the daemon set. So it's important to note for users who want high availability that onboarding to this does require taking an outage. There's, as far as I know, no transparent way to onboard to this without causing an outage. So I would recommend they do this during their first upgrade. But once they have this node selector applied, and by the way, I started on step 2. First, they need to label all of their nodes that they want the ztunnel running on with the current revision label. They create that as a node selector, and effectively that doesn't cause any change. All of the ztunnels are now running on all of the nodes. Nothing terribly interesting there, but during an upgrade, what they can do is they can deploy a second upgraded ztunnel daemon set with a new revision node selector. And that should cause nothing to change again. That daemon set will not run anywhere because right now there are no nodes with that label. I saw in my peripheral that there was a question, but I don't know who it was.
Sorry. Yeah. I think it might be actually possible to stop the rolling update if you set the upgrade strategy to on delete. So we could consider that. And I think you can actually change that dynamically. So you could even set it only during the upgrade if you wanted to, although you might want it in general. Basically what that means is that if you change the daemon set, it doesn't do a rolling restart.
Oh, that's very interesting. I will experiment with that. So that's the upgrade strategy of the daemon set?
Yeah, the key thing is it's in the spec, not in the template. So it's like the meta attributes of the daemon set. So I think anything in there you should be able to change without the daemon set changing.
And the idea there would be that we could allow users to onboard to this model without disrupting their existing daemon set?
Yeah, I guess so. Or if you're using this model, then you actually maybe always want that set, right? But yes, you could also switch to it dynamically.
When you say you could always use that, are you saying that would work in lieu of this node selector paradigm?
No, I don't think so, because you need a way to say. No, I don't think so, because you'd end up with two of them. You need it as well. But
Okay.
what we're saying here is that you never want two Z tunnels running together. The
Right.
default daemon set config is actually a rolling update. So any change to the daemon set, which are a rolling update, which means there's two of them. So if you really only want one, then you'd probably want on delete. Although the requirement that you should have exactly one is not necessarily reachable. It's kind of either 0 or 1, or
One or many.
0 to, yeah, well, I don't know if you can even say 1 or many. You can always have 0, right? But we're getting off the rails here a bit in pedantics. So I'll let you continue. But actually, there's a lot of hands. So
Yeah. Let's see, I'll open the queue. It looks like Carl's next.
Oh, there you go. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Yeah. So the only gotcha with the on delete is if you make a change to your daemon set, it doesn't take effect until you delete it. So I ran into an issue where I made a change to a stateful set. I'm like, why is it not changing? I went and looked, and it was set to on delete instead of whatever the default strategy is. So,
And that delete
that-
event would be when you delete the pod.
yeah.
So that actually sounds like it could be a completely alternate design. Like if we
Yeah.
went with on delete, and then we told users to delete the pods one at a time after draining them and marking and cordoning them, that would work in lieu of the label selector for upgrading. Of course, it runs the risk of, if for whatever reason the pod is disrupted, it automatically upgrades. But it is interesting. I'll add an alternatives considered and sort of experiment with that this week.
Yeah. It's just when you're like making a change to the daemon set and you're like, why is this not rolling out? That's something to look at.
Okay, thank you. Austin?
Yeah, two small comments. One is we keep using the word upgrade. I think it's important. In general, binary is not necessarily is part of the upgrade, but it's something that can be permanent or long term, or you can always have one node in the or one node pool that is running a canary with different settings, or you may have different node pools, each of them with different settings as a long-term strategy. We have some workloads that need something, some workloads that need something completely different in terms of settings, not only in terms of version of zTunnel. So I just want to make sure that any design we do is not assuming that people will move to or want to have a single uniform version, but we may have a permanent state where people have multiple versions. And I hope everyone agrees that cordoning is right and the only safe option that exists to do this kind of upgrades. But I would challenge the idea that you can only have one zTunnel or only one CNI. It is perfectly possible to have multiple zTunnels daemon sets with different names and running at the same time, and multiple CNIs even, as long as each CNI, a pod, it's only taken over by a particular CNI and zTunnel, and there is some flexibility for a CNI to, communicate with one zTunnel or the other. So if we ever want to move to a model where we do not cordon, then probably the right solution will be to tolerate multiple zTunnels and implement the logic to kind of, the CNI layer to be decoupled from zTunnel and actually be able, based on pod restart, for example, like with sidecars, to switch at restart or when to kind of a different version of the zTunnel. So we have zTunnel version 1, zTunnel version 2, and when the pod restarts, CNI would move it. I wouldn't do it. It's far simpler to just cordon and do the clean stuff, but it's an possibility.
Yeah, that's a great point, Costin. We've sort of got 3 levels of complexity that we can do for zTunnel upgrades. The first is what we've already put out there today in the alpha, which is you might call it the YOLO upgrade. You upgrade the daemon set, everything upgrades automatically. There's some degree of traffic disruption, and then things pick up the new version and move forward. We suspect that that's not going to be good enough for production for a lot of our users. And so this represents slightly more complexity, but the unit of upgrade is still a node. So all of the pods on a single node effectively get upgraded at the same time, with the exception of the fact that when you change the version, there's no pods, no application pods running on the node because it's been drained. But as soon as pods move back onto that node, all of those pods get the new version of the Z-tunnel. The even more fine-grained and more complex option would be to have concurrent versions of the Z-tunnel running on each pod and some sort of revision-like logic that shows which pods are selected by which versions of the Z-tunnel. I suspect that that is more control and probably more complexity than is merited at this point. But like all things in the Istio community, my hope is that we can put this out, we can get some feedback from users as to whether this meets their needs, and if it doesn't, we can add more nuance and complexity as the need arises. All right. So let's see here. I'll go back to the upgrade flow. So you deploy, the first step in an upgrade is to deploy the new Z-tunnel daemon set. Again, it gets scheduled on 0 nodes because the revision node selector is on new revision and no nodes are labeled with that label. Then for each node, you first cordon. That causes no new pods to be scheduled onto the node. Then you drain the node, which progressively evicts all the pods on the node. This can take some time, and you need to make sure that it's completed, that all of your application pods have been evicted. It's important to note that cordoning and draining does not impact daemon set nodes. So anything that runs as a daemon set, including the Z-tunnel, will still be scheduled to the node at this point. There's a wait for drain step. At this point, once it's drained, you update the node label to reflect the new revision. This will cause the old Z-tunnel to be descheduled from the node and the new Z-tunnel to be scheduled on the node. This will disrupt any existing networking processes that are happening that are captured by the Z-tunnel, but since all the application pods are evicted, we would expect that this does not cause any application disruption for the user. Once the Z-tunnel becomes, oh, I've got a hanging reference there. Let me close that paren. Once the Z-tunnel is available, which should be relatively quick, the node may then be uncordoned, allowing new pods to be scheduled on this node with a new Z-tunnel. And then there's just a validate step to make sure that everything looks healthy. This is very much going to be dependent on the user's understanding of application health. So this is done for each node. It can also be done on groups of nodes at a time rather than one at a time. But the bottom line is this needs to be repeated until all nodes in the cluster have been upgraded, at which point you can delete the previous Z-tunnel daemon set. This can take as little as a few minutes or as much as several months. Costin mentioned that the stable state may be that you want different versions of the Z-tunnel running on different nodes constantly. So that would be completely supported under this plan. We're not really particularly opinionated about how long that process needs to take for a user. It very much depends on their use case. But they don't want to delete the previous version of the Z-tunnel until it is no longer scheduled on any nodes and therefore no longer in use. Any questions on the user flow there? All right. If we were to do this, we would need to add the node selector to our Helm charts for Z-tunnel. I would recommend that we start with that as optional, not a part of the on by default, just because it does create some degree of disruption. Users don't have to label nodes at all to use Istio Ambient today. We would need to document the process somewhere. I might even recommend starting with just a blog post on how to do this, even without Helm chart upgrades, just to collect feedback from users. We have our first patch version of Ambient Beta rolling out, I think, in about 2 weeks. So if we could get a blog post out by then and begin collecting feedback from users on how this upgrade process works or doesn't work for them, that would potentially save us some work later on. And then, of course, we need, if we're not doing this already, I'm not certain if we are or not, but we need to make sure that all of the cross-version compatibility for a single minor version upgrade is well tested. within our code base that traffic continues to flow between envoys and Z tunnels of both versions. And potentially we need to begin to document our version compatibility matrix. Are we going to support skip version upgrades with Ambient, etc.? That would all kind of fall within this cross-version compatibility testing and documentation. The caveats section really just addresses the fact that there are not many other CNIs that do this. If you look at Cilium's upgrade documentation, they recommend that users just upgrade the Cilium daemon set in place and suffer the outage. Many cloud providers who offer Cilium as part of their managed Kubernetes service will do this during the Kubernetes upgrade, in which case it does reflect the sort of cordon and draining activity that we're doing, but it's largely not documented in open source. So that means that there's not a lot of prior art that we can draw on, unfortunately. Yeah, John?
Yeah, just a clarification there. A lot of the other daemon sets, other networking daemon sets, the daemon set is actually kind of the control plane. It's more like the CNI in our case, and the data plane is the Linux kernel. So like, I don't think like on GK, for example, they're not doing anything fancy with cordoning or draining or anything. They just restart the daemon set and it's fine, because the Cilium agent going away doesn't cause a disruption to the data plane because it's all living in the kernel. And obviously the kernel upgrades when the node upgrades, so that is kind of, I suppose, doing the cordoning. That doesn't apply to everything. Like there is like an envoy, a per node envoy, of course, that Cilium has. But that's also not something that most cloud providers bundle. Similar like kubeproxy, a similar story, like it's all IP tables rules. There are some other user space data planes, I think, but I'm not familiar with what they do. And I don't know that Cilium Envoy does anything special either. So maybe they do. Good luck.
So I know that this is not the first model to use a shared per node proxy, whether it's in the kernel or not. I would imagine that upgrades are an issue for those other tools as well.
The thing about the kernel is that it stays there, right? It's decoupled from, like, you don't upgrade the kernel. I mean, you do.
Or when you do, you're draining the
node.
node, and yeah, okay.
Yeah. So.
Well, it's never in the kernel, compiled in the kernel. It's a module that can be unloaded, upgraded, but nobody does that, I mean, because it's simply unsafe.
Okay, that's helpful. And then, of course, everyone's favorite section on bike shedding. Sorry, one last bit of the caveat. Because there's not a lot of prior art, this does not integrate with any existing platform engineering tooling that I'm aware of, like Argo CD and Backstage, other tools that users tend to make use of for their upgrades, don't have a process for draining and cordoning nodes and upgrading them one at a time built in. Austin?
Mitch, sorry to disappoint you, but this is how I can guarantee virtually all vendors upgrade their nodes. So it's a process that it's well defined, well tuned. It's everywhere. Nobody is doing node upgrades and kernel upgrades and system upgrades otherwise.
Yeah, so this is the documented process for upgrading a Kubernetes node. That's correct. However, what you're upgrading in the case of a Kubernetes node is not pods running on Kubernetes, right? You're running, upgrading parts of the VM or containers that are running natively on the VM outside of Kubernetes, like the kubelet, etc. This is the only case that I know of where what you're trying to upgrade is actually being run by Kubernetes with the node drain process. I think it's a good process. I think it makes sense. I'm just saying that without the prior art, it does not have deep integration into the tools that our users want to make use of for upgrading things today. I don't think there's a clear and easy solution for that, as far as I know, there's not a better way to do this, but it may mean that we need to work with those communities to help them understand this process and to make the node cordon and drain process a little bit more accessible to our users through Argo, Flux, Backstage, etc. Last note is just on the label name. I've chosen to use istio rev in the proposal because it's similar to a revision. It's not identical to a revision, and that could create some confusion for users. For instance, you might have some pods that get scheduled to a new revision node, but are using the old revision in terms of their gateway, and that would be totally acceptable, but it might be a little bit confusing for the user. So it's possible that we could need a new label for this design, but I didn't want to sort of hold up all of the design. I wanted to spend most of the time talking about the actual functionality of the design rather than the name of a label. But this is a good time if people have strong opinions one way or the other to talk about that.
I don't have strong opinions particularly. I mean, I have many opinions, but I think vendors probably will have strong opinions because this node cordoning and draining is part of their automated process, and it's probably more important to focus on optimizing it for Kubernetes operators who upgrade the node CNI and everything at once instead of focusing on Argo. I don't think Argo is the right tool for CNI and this kind of level of operations. I mean, it might be, but it's probably better because each vendor has its own, canarying, draining. I mean, there are kind of other things that need to be checked if a new node is healthy and many things that can break. It's not something that you check with Argo.
I agree to some extent, Costin. I think that it's likely that the major cloud providers are not going to need this design in order to upgrade the Z-tunnel safely. They can already integrate it with their existing Kubernetes node upgrade design. So I think they're already set. This is more to give that same degree of enterprise availability to users in open source who are not necessarily taking advantage of those cloud providers, maybe in their own Kubernetes environment or something else. But like the Googles of the world, for instance, I would expect can figure out how to upgrade the Z-tunnel daemon set without us documenting that in a blog. Yuval?
I have a question about I think part of the required word, we need to validate it on the popular cloud providers because I think in GKE, if you manually apply a label to the node, at some point GKE will remove it. When you do like a node upgrade, like when the node pool upgrades, I think it will nuke manually applied labels, something like that. Maybe Google people know it better than me.
I believe you create them at if you create them at pool creation times, they're fine. You basically create a new pool, but yes, that's true, and that's fine because you just need for a while for your upgrade. Or if you create a permanent pool with a label.
So the end of the process should be removing the node selector then, and that would mean another restart.
So it sounds like if I'm understanding correctly, and you have to specify label values at node pool creation time for GKE, then the process for GKE users would, rather than changing labels on nodes, actually they wouldn't even need to drain. They could simply create a new node pool that has the new revision label, and gradually scale that node pool up and the old node pool down. Sounds kind of intensive. I don't know.
By the way, I don't know if node selector will. I mean, if you use node selector and the labels from the nodes are changed, if you're getting evicted or not. But with Affinity, at least, it's basically just during scheduling used. It's not going to use it during scheduling, which is probably what we'll use. So that's. I mean, again, we probably need to test what happens if you change labels with a node selector. But with Affinity, I'm pretty sure it works properly.
So Affinity is best effort. Is that right, Costin?
Well, it's
There's
probably
different
good enough.
things.
I mean, for all purposes, there are different modes, and it can be tuned to do it only during scheduling, and then if labels change, don't evict, or to evict.
Oh yeah, that's right. So I think Affinity has prefer or require during scheduling, but not always require. So there's actually three modes.
Ignore during execution, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
But that's I think fine. I'd have to walk through it, but it seems like it's fine.
When I saw it first time, I hated the long names, but now I appreciate them.
Yeah, Me too.
So that proposal would effectively, rather than utilizing label selectors within the daemon set, we would utilize affinity. It's not clear to me how that would be meaningfully different in terms of having to relabel nodes.
Not in that term, but in terms of what happens if the nodes are relabeled afterwards. I mean, if they are evicted or not, that's we don't know. I mean, if anyone knows, probably should confirm.
Okay. I can dig into that a little bit this week and get to understand how node labels work across a few of the CSPs and report back next week.
I think also in
But
general, what like the node pool scales up in the middle of an upgrade?
you will get the old one and you need to repeat the process. So you need a controller that is going and put label. I mean, everything will need a controller to do this automation. If you want to do it from the user perspective instead of just letting the vendor do it. Yeah, that's a good point.
Okay,
Yeah,
I'll add a note to look at node scalability events. How do I respond to this?
But it's very hard to kind of get the feeling from, if it's not explicit, is the consensus, or most people agree that draining the node is the right approach for this, and at least at this point. Well, the details, affinity or node levels, that's kind of, we can sort it out, but is this a path we want to follow? And
Are there even any other proposals?
well, we discussed in the past. Swapping the Z tunnel, or with doing what the Envoy is doing when it's passing file description. I heard all kind of other ideas, which are very complicated. I mean, even I mentioned that you can run to Z tunnels and do smart things about it. That's not necessarily that I think it's the right thing to do. Just it's possible.
Okay, I think this is good feedback. I've got some research to do for the next week, and then I will bring this back. Given the time frame that we have for our first patch update, I do think that we should probably try to have at least enough consensus for a blog post next week, helping users understand what their options are with this CVE fix. But I'll bring this back at that time with some answers, particularly to the node labeling questions about the CSPs. In the meantime, feel free to weigh in if you have thoughts during the week. Obviously, there's some great engagement already, but more would be even better. Thanks, everybody. That was the only thing on the agenda. Did anyone else have anything to add today? All right. Well, in that case, thanks everyone for joining and for sharing your thoughts, and we'll see you next week.
Thanks. Cheers.